Hi, and welcome to My Words, Our Journey, Season 5, Episode 5, and the novel we're going through right now, Defender of Children 2. I'm Monty, your host, and today we'll begin with Chapter 20. The best he could tell himself was that none of his men were hurt or captured. It was a little comfort. He nor his team were used to failure, certainly not epic failure like they experienced last night. Now, there would be no element of surprise, at least not until other arrangements were made, and they would be made quickly. This needed to end now. As he tried to shower off the anxiety that engulfed him, he thought about the next step and decided only after a few minutes. It was a tested move that had worked for him in the past, and he was confident it would work again. When he was dried, he dialed the number and, with no small talk, told the person on the other end of the phone what he required. He was told he'd be contacted within 2 hours to inform him the deed had been done. This had never been a one-man operation, but now the stakes were too high for some to ignore. While the killer was resetting, the group of lawyers, assistants, and aides were busy too. Everything was being prepared for travel. The group had already begun talking about moving out of the hotel when the manager sheepishly came to talk. It wasn't his fault. Probably the owner had made the call, but everyone understood. They were a huge liability at this point. So the conversation was short and cordial, and two Airbnbs had been secured for the group. They would be side by side, would accommodate the group, and they were on the water. A little pricey, but the owner did give them a slight break since they'd be renting both for at least the next 3 months. Cash promised up front. The GM of the property and Remy agreed that they would be out of the meeting rooms and their sleeping rooms no later than 6 p.m., and a car service had been called to help move people and their boxes to the new homes away from home. No one was more excited than Leonard. He loved the water, the sound, smell, everything. He was the first one in the lobby, with a more positive attitude than he had had in days. Second to the lobby was Gretchen Case. Gretchen was a 30-something, lived at home with her ailing parents, worked 2 jobs to be able to go to college, where she excelled, and readied herself to be the next great lawyer. She was also the one that was targeted by the killer. She had received one simple text as she made her way to the lobby. Now she was frantically texting back. Anyone else would have noticed something was wrong, but not Leonard. He was too excited about the move to notice anyone else's behavior. Within 20 minutes, the lobby was full, everybody ready to move. The boxes had been loaded in a van by themselves and were already on their way. 3 more vans now pulled up in front, ready for loading. Gretchen had stopped texting minutes ago. While she had no idea what was going on, there was that feeling in the pit of her stomach that she may have put them all in danger. She could only pray that wasn't the case. The ride would be less than 20 minutes, and it was announced that dinner would be waiting for them when they arrived. A seafood boil had been ordered, along with a bar. After all, the group needed it. After being on the highway for only a few minutes, the caravan took the exit that would lead them to the beachfront homes. Leonard could swear he felt the stress lifting from his body as they got closer to the ocean. He had closed his eyes and envisioned himself with a cold drink, a plate of hot food, and the ocean view. That was all taken away when he felt the van come to an abrupt halt. Chapter 21. The first shot was out of anger. The killer did not like the fact he was being exposed unnecessarily. It was not in his character to behave this way, but he was over the detectives and their new reporter friend. He could have instructed his man to take out a tire, but he wanted to make his point clear from the jump. So, the driver of the lead car was the unfortunate soul to set the tone for the interaction about to take place. He was not playing. The van rolled to a stop when it hit the curb on the left side of the street. The caravan had not been driving fast, so there was no damage to the van, besides the bullet-sized hole in the windshield and the blood that stained the driver's seat from the wounded man's temple. He had died instantly. No pain, no white light, just gone. The others ducked as low as possible and waited, most praying there would not be another shot, but knowing that there would be. Leonard was in the second van. When it slammed to a sudden halt, he was still not sure what was happening. A silencer had been used to kill the driver, and so it took a few minutes for everyone to figure out what had happened. Because of the events of the night before, everyone was hesitant and measured, a little more than usual. The call from the first van was received by the second and the third. Simple statement. Steve has been shot in the head and he is dead. Everyone stay where you are. That would be the only communication between them. Sean and Kenny were in the last vehicle. They knew from the location that the assailants would be above, just waiting for them to exit the vans. Something was affecting their cell phones, so no backup was coming, unless a good Samaritan called. They couldn't count on that. The street was still, with empty buildings lining both sides. The perfect location for this, Kenny thought. When Sean's phone rang, it startled him. It had only been a minute or two since he had tried using it. The number was unknown. He answered. Listen, do not speak. We are both professionals. We understand the situation you're currently in. We don't want to harm anyone else unnecessarily. But if we don't get you and your friends within the next 5 minutes, we will take action. The line went dead. When he tried to use his phone again, it was blocked. Time was ticking, maybe 3 minutes left by the time Sean and Kenny moved to the front of the van. There was no way the four of them would be returning themselves over. That was a death sentence for them. And who was to say that the rest wouldn't be taken out as well? No, they would all be leaving together. How was the question that would be answered in the next couple minutes. If the vans moved, they would just shoot out the tires, or worse. The van's occupants could not speak to the other vans, so there was no way to coordinate anything. There was no workable solution. With that realization, Ken and Sean instructed everyone to exit the van together. There was no plan other than not to die in a 15-passenger van. When they all exited with arms raised, the other two vans did the same. Now there was a pretty substantial group standing in the middle of the street with arms raised. The detectives and Trish knew the men wanting them dead would know who they were, and none of them wanted more fatalities because of them, so they stood in front of the group. Now the four looked more like they were waiting on the firing squad, and they kinda were. From above, the group heard these words, Gretchen Case, please step forward. In unison, the small crowd looked for the petite woman that now had hung her head and began to sob. To some, the realization came quickly. To others, it took a minute for them to understand. When she finally walked to the front of the group and heard the voice again this time, thanking her for her assistance and telling her to enter the building directly in front of her and go to the third floor where she would be safe. Shock or worry for their own situation, no one said a word as they watched her walk through the door, never looking back. This is bad, Kenny whispered to Sean and Leonard. At that exact moment, as if on cue, the cement truck came directly up behind them, honking his loud horn, an arm raised out the window. Someone else is having a bad day, Leonard thought. That briefest of encounters gave Sean the adrenaline he needed, and with a shout, everyone follow me, and he was up against the building, moving fast to the door of the building next to the right of which Gretchen had gone in only a moment earlier. There was no way to know where their enemies would be positioned, but he knew not to go through the same door she had gone through, so he quickly made a decision. Everyone followed, and by now, anyone that was carrying a gun had pulled it out and had their heads on a swivel. Sean's goal was to get as high off the ground as possible, and then to regroup. All his mind told him during this time was to get people high off the ground as possible, like a voice in his head. Not his voice, but a familiar voice. When they reached the top floor, they found two large offices, both with tables and chairs, left out, looking like they had been used for some kind of a training class. The rooms were dirty and dusty. No one cared. For now, they seemed to be free of the killers, and that was enough for the time being. Carefully closed the window shades, tables on their sides, towards the back of the room, furthest from the door and windows. That was the plan. Kenny, Sean, and Leonard stood in the middle of the room, taking a second to catch their breaths and regroup. They watched as Trish and one of Remy's interns led the group moving the furniture. Kenny thought to himself, we just need a chance. Chapter 22. The killer could not believe what he had just witnessed. A few more seconds, and the four would have been killed, and he would be back on his way to retirement. Now he had a problem. Go after the group and still try to accomplish the goal, or live to fight another day. He was tired of having to make this call, especially twice in the same day. In the end, he took Gretchen and two of his teams, and they headed to the rendezvous point, while the two remaining teams entered the building with instructions to take 4 minutes to try and find their targets. If not, abort. The men were young, in top physical shape, and eager to take out the targets that were beginning to be a real pain. So, within a minute, they could be heard on the top floor clearing rooms. They were not trying to hide the fact they were there. On the contrary, they seemed to be making more racket than was necessary. Inside the last room, those without guns were low as possible to the floor behind the tables that had been placed on their sides and now formed an inner and outer wall. The rest were armed and ready as they could be for the unknown to come through the door any second. Now the silence was worse than the noise they had created only a minute earlier. They were toying with them at this point, it seemed. Leonard was repositioning to take some weight off his knee when the door partially shattered. The men were armed, but not protecting themselves otherwise. The group was afraid they would have been wearing armor of some sort. Thankfully, that was not the case. They came bursting into the room, scattering pieces of the shattered door everywhere. Once through, it took the first couple a split second to get their bearings. All the time it was needed for Kenny and Sean to take out the first two. 1, 2. They had no idea how many would follow and keep up the fight, so the three had asked the others to not use their guns until absolutely necessary, or they saw that there was trouble that they just couldn't avoid. They needed to save ammo, if possible. They trusted no one as much as each other in these situations, so the three would be taking the lead. The next two came through the door, guns ready, and began shooting, one from the right and one from the left. The bullets were hitting the desks, the walls, and causing destruction, but those up front had no way of knowing if anyone was hit. At this point, it was all happening fast and loud. Leonard had hit the floor and took 2 shots low at the intruder's legs. He hit the one on the left. As he fell, Leonard fired one more shot that hit him in the head and ended his life. The other had emptied one gun and was pulling another from his waistband as two more tried to squeeze through the door at the same time. Kenny took out the first, and Sean and Leonard took out the next two. It had taken each one emptying their revolvers to take them out. As everyone reloaded, another intruder slipped in, this time crouched down and with a piece of the door in front of him. He was ready. As he aimed his weapon at Leonard, everyone tried without success to get reloaded. Kenny jumped from behind his table and took 2 steps before the assailant turned his gun in his direction. Then out of nowhere, a loud boom, and the man hit the floor with a thud. As everyone turned to see where the shot had come from, Trish was wiping the sweat off her forehead with the sleeve of her blouse, gun still in her hand. "Okay," Sean said. "Thank you, Trish. That was a classic definition of 'we're in trouble.' I would love to hear where you learned to shoot like that sometime, but now let's get out of here." Then someone shouted, "My cell phone works." So the police were called, and they waited in place until they were cleared to leave. Precautionary measures. The detective has prepared everyone for a long, drawn-out affair, but as soon as someone with clear authority came into view, Remy went into action. He would have been silent until now, but within 30 minutes, everyone crowded into 2 vans and with a police escort drove away, thanks to Remy and whatever he had said to the authorities. Chapter 23. As expected, the men that were killed in the firefight had no identification. It was everyone's guess that they wouldn't be in the database either. It was frustrating, but not surprising. The group agreed they had gained at least one insight. They were onto something that some powerful folks did not want them to continue to search or ask questions about. Leonard hoped that meant that everyone on his team now at least would consider the fact that regardless of his carelessness and stupidity, he may be innocent. Leonard could not see the ocean. It was completely dark outside, and he had purposely left the porch lights off. Still, he could hear the water moving. It gave him peace. Kenny was outside, too, but he had taken a beach chair and went around the side of the house. There was a nice breeze off the ocean. He had a cold beer, and he really wanted to talk to Renee. He had learned early on in the relationship Renee could tell when he was not telling the truth, or even the whole story, so they had agreed he would not hold anything back. The story he told her sounded more like a movie plot, but she was getting what she had asked for, and when he was done, there was silence on the other end of the phone. Then, "So Leonard didn't do it, and the real killer thinks the reporter is onto something and has told you." "Well, I mean, if you want to break it down to its simplest form, then, yeah, I'd say so." Sean was also on the phone, but talking about the day's events. They had actually gone back in time to their wedding day. See, today was their 23rd wedding anniversary. It killed him that they were apart, but his amazing wife was saying all the right things. Still, it hurt. He knew she was volunteering at the church today, so he had sent her flowers there so others could see, and they would ooh and ah over her, even if just for a minute. She deserved it. She really was the rock of the family. Sitting on the bed in his room, he stared at the picture in his wallet. The picture was worn, but he could still see the look on her face and the beauty in her eyes. It was the happiest of days. "When I get home, we should see about a sitter and take a couple days to ourselves. You okay with that?" Jill was okay with that. At the same time, the killer was on the phone as well. He had people he answered to, too. and they were becoming increasingly impatient with the current situation, as was he. He had not made excuses. Instead, he listened, and when appropriate, responded, understood. That was how these types of one-sided conversations went. When it was done, there was no goodbye, just a click on the other end of the line. He was not the only one to be putting everything on the line for this cause. As much as he had to lose, they had more. Trish had tried to call her office, but only got the answering machine. So, she had called her counterpart, Stacy, on her cell phone. She picked up on the third ring. Are you okay? Are you part of this whole mess? Where are you? OMG, I've been so worried. Your phone's going straight to voicemail. When she finally took a breath, Trish informed her she was involved, she was fine, she couldn't tell her where she was at the moment, but she hoped to really soon. She also told her, please don't repeat anything we've talked about, not to anyone. I've got to figure this whole thing out. Since talking to Tilly, I've barely had any time to get my bearings, but I will, and when I do, we'll blow this whole thing up, you and me. Trish sat back and wondered if she should call her parents, but decided rather quickly the answer was no. They didn't watch the news. They'd have no idea anything happened. And they would have even less idea that their daughter would be caught up in anything of the sort. As far as her parents knew, she was still waiting tables 3 nights a week and working full-time during the day as an admin assistant. Lying was to protect them, she always told herself. They worried. And honestly, she had lost the patience to deal with it. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Trisha's cell phone vibrated, where she had left it when she fell asleep. As she retrieved it from the pillow next to her, she saw that it was Stacy. It was not the first time that her work friend had reached out in the middle of the night for one reason or another, so Trish answered with, Okay, boy trouble? Out of booze? Or is there a spider in your shower? She expected a smart comeback. Instead, Trish heard her friend whisper, I think they found me. Chapter 24. Without thinking, Trish tossed back the covers and ran to the room across the hall, threw open the door, hit the light switch, and ran in next to the bed. Kenny was shocked. His first instinct, reached for his revolver, but then he realized it was Trish standing in front of him, with her right arm extended, as if she wanted him to take the phone. My friend Stacy thinks they're at her house. She threw the phone at Kenny like it suddenly got very hot. Stacy, tell me exactly what's going on. Ken could hear the heavy breathing at the other end of the line. They're in the house. He motioned for Trish to grab his phone off the charger. Call 911. Kenny heard the frightened woman yell, They know you're here. The last words he heard before he assumed the phone was broken was a male voice in the background say, It's too late for you. Kenny and Trish were hitting the main road off the side street the home rested on when he realized they were both barefoot and still in what they had worn to bed. Kenny in his black Adidas shorts and his favorite Old Michigan t-shirt, and Trish in a pair of shorts and a Bon Jovi tee. He did not know the area well enough to know if they'd get there in time, but he knew if he had taken the time to wake the others in the house, explained what was going on, and waited for them to get out of the house, she'd be dead or gone. This was their only chance, he had a feeling. Trish was giving him turn-by-turn directions and doing a good job. They were out in front of the townhouse in a matter of minutes. Still, he could tell by the look on the officers' faces that had arrived before them that the news was not going to be what Trish was hoping for. The officers on the scene were not impressed with Kenny's credentials, so they stood outside and waited for someone to come ask them questions and hopefully give them some kind of an update. The questions were many, the updates were lacking. Sign of a struggle. Stacy was gone. 30 minutes passed from the time Stacy's call had come in to when Kenny and Trish caught the news coming over the man's walkie-talkie. A woman's body had been found alongside a road leading out of town, northwest towards Fayetteville. He could feel Trish tense up next to him. 2.5 hours later, the pair were pulling back into the driveway of their home away from home. After more questions and then Trish having to ID the body, they were beyond tired. Now they would have to explain to everyone inside what had happened. Kenny looked at Trish and said, Are you up for this? And we'll end there for today. As always, thank you for supporting the podcast, and I hope you're enjoying the journey. Have a great day.